Yeah, so it's about an issue. It started when Jan and Sean were talking about having a separate SLI for the service desk, so the thing that receives emails and creates issues for for those emails and so on. Um, but that's not as used as everything like that runs. That's mostly Sidekick, so that's where that SLI would live. But that's uh, nowhere near used as much as all the other Sidekick jobs that run. So we would need, like, if we add that SLI, we would need to be able to set a different SLO for, like, specifically for that, for both aptex and error rates. So I created an issue about how to do that, and I wanted to bring it up here to hear if we should do that. I don't know if anybody has thoughts.
I do.
I thought so. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
So the reason why, just to give you a bit of background rather than anything else, the reason why we have a single value is because if you, well, I'm probably the only person aware of this, but if you cast yourself back far enough, we didn't have JSON generating all of this stuff. And it was all hand coded rules. And it was really hard not to mess things up because you had to make sure that everything was here and here and here and in 10 different YAML files, which was really horrible. And one of the things that I chose to keep things a little bit simpler was to have a single SLO per service, because it was just like one less thing that you could mess up. And the intention has never been to stick with that. And now that we have it in the JSON and it's like, you know, everything is got a single source of the truth instead of having 10 sources of truth. I don't see any reason why we have to keep that. It is my take on that.
Cool. And do you have thoughts on where to keep it? Because the
I
suggestion
do.
Sean made on the merge request was like to keep it right next to the SLI definition, and
Absolutely.
my
Yeah.
thought was to put it on the top with the thresholds because we have separate kinds of
No.
thresholds. No?
Right. So okay. So those. Yeah, it's slightly. So I think if you aggregate up to, so we'll have to treat those as the ones for the service, and at the service level we'll have one set, but then on the individual level, I guess it will inherit the ones from the service. But I think we should definitely keep them on the. You're smiling at the, or
I
wincing or
don't understand.
smiling.
I don't understand what you mean by inherent, because if you define a new SLI and that has a
Yeah.
certain, like, what I mean with different thresholds is we have the contractual ones, but let's leave those out. We have the monitoring
Yeah.
ones, and then
Forget
we
about
have the
those.
ones then
Yeah.
we have the ones for, like, the defined and the other thresholds hash,
Yeah.
um, which are used for by the delivery team for the, like, deployment health and MTBF.
Yeah.
So
So those, I think that those MTBF ones, yeah, it's tricky because we got these different thresholds where maybe, you know, we should be looking
well,
to go towards one.
we don't have to have all of them. Like, you
Yeah.
don't, if you,
Yeah. We
like,
don't need the
monitoring
deployment
threshold.
health one because that's only at the service level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but, like, even for an like, if you don't specify a different one for deployment or for MTBF, then,
Yeah.
like, we'll just not record it and everything's fine.
So if we're
So
not really using MTBF at the moment, do we need to include it and still have these?
yeah,
Like,
I,
I don't
I
want to
think it would
make I don't
be,
want to make
it's
a decision
certainly,
based
yeah.
on this if
Yeah.
we're not using.
Well, the deployment one is used, I think, but the, like, for this kind of
Mm.
super low traffic SLI, it
But
wouldn't
the
matter.
yeah the deployment one will you will never have on an SLI because we're not monitoring individual components. We're only monitoring the services, and we'd never want to do that because it's just too itty bitty, right? Like, you know, they don't want to stop the deployments on like monitoring 10 different components and anything like that. At least not yet.
No, they want to stop the
Yeah.
deployment if a service goes.
Although what came up in a meeting I had with that technical debt assessment meeting with Christopher on Tuesdays, they wanted to have a whole bunch of, like, for every feature flag toggle, like basically like a more rigorous set of dashboards and everything. And what I was encouraging is actually pointing to an SLI rather, and then So in those cases with the feature flags, it would be, there would be an action on the individual, if the SLI of a particular feature went over an edge, then the feature flag could be automatically reversed, for example, would be one approach to that. But that's a slightly different discussion. But I think, yeah, if we just had a single one, which was effectively the monitoring one.
So we have a monitoring one, and you can define inside the service level definition, you can define something like as a threshold. And if it doesn't, it will use SLI kind or whatever we're going to define there to find the right threshold from the global monitoring
from the top
threshold.
one. Yeah.
I love that idea. And then we just ignore all the other thresholds. Like,
yeah. Because the deployment one doesn't matter. The MTBF one, I mean, ultimately over time, the MTBF one is kind of like where we want to be rather than, so yeah, we should, those two should theoretically come together, but we'll see that happening when it happens. But yeah, I think from, and also let's do it as the first with the monitoring, and then we'll have a better understanding of it, and then we can move forward. And if we need the MTBF one, we can do it. But
yeah, what I'm thinking about doing now is we can just, I think that's what Sean suggested. We can just repeat the hashes inside the service level definition, so you have just the monitoring thresholds, and then
yeah. I think that might get quite like there's a lot of conflict then.
I'm going to
this is my main concern about that.
That's like implementation detail. I'm going to take note of what you said, like keep them close together, the threshold and the SLI, and then we'll take it from there.
Because there's another reason as well, Bob, and that's that we're starting to see some cases where people are sort of duplicating services, and then what they're actually doing is they're kind of denormalizing SLIs out of there. And the case that I can think of is Alejandro with the Petroni and Petroni registry, I think it is. It's basically another copy of the Petroni metrics catalog, and he's basically dried it up and he's copied and pasted, right? And in that case, it makes more sense. So he's kind of got a single source of some of the SLIs that are common to both. And in that case,
like
you wouldn't want it to.
Thing.
Yeah, exactly. But in that case, when you're looking at that SLI that's shared between multiple services, you wouldn't want to kind of have to remember to go to another place to see the SLO, right? It makes sense for those things to be kept together, because then, although it might be problematic if you want to have different ones for different services, but that's overthinking it.
I think we do want both, like one per service and then one per SLI in a service. I think we want
for the defaults. Yeah.
And then we've got everything, like we've got the best from both worlds, that from what was discussed in that OpenSLO issue 49 or something.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. I will take a note of that in that issue. Thanks for talking me through it.
Yeah. Exciting stuff.
Since we are talking about error budgets and having both of those thresholds listed in for each of them, I just wanted to bring up that there is a conversation that some people are having about splitting the view of error budgets into two parts, so that if anyone wants to contribute to that, they can do so. Some of the teams want to treat different. They want to treat the different portions with different, with a different level of urgency. Like they want to treat the errors first and the AppDex portion second. But when they're looking at it as a whole, they're only seeing it as a whole. They have to dive in to be able to split them apart.
But Rachel, why don't we wait until we've got the custom SLIs, the custom thresholds? Why are we doing this? This is not the time to be doing that.
And I would prefer to I would prefer to go to a place where we monitor groups the way we monitor services. So they have a short range, they watch the last 6 hours like we do on the service overview, and then they see things happening there. And then the big number is more of like how much have we improved over time. And then like now the single number is just because it was easy to get and like easy to grasp, but I think we want something cleverer. later.
Well, if that's the case, then I'll get the conversation to pause so that they first see the advantages that are going to come from having the custom SLIs per endpoint. And if that doesn't give them enough, then we can start having a conversation about what they actually need further than that. But I think you're right. Pausing the conversation is more effective.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
Andrew, what do you think about
the patient is on the table, Bob is performing the heart surgery. Like, now's not the time to give him a new pair of lungs. Well, maybe it is, but let's just. I would say, like, we're going to have a very good idea of what that's going to change with regards to the aptexes, and so, like, let's not change the other thing at the same time.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
What are your like thoughts for the future on this? Like with what I just mentioned on having a short view and so on, like what do we use the 28-day thing for? Because that's more of like an SLA number.
What's really nice about having the short view is people want to make changes and watch the changes affect their error budgets right now. They want to almost watch it while it rolls out and watch the little graph change and feel good that they can see the direct impact of their work. And over the 28 days, you can't really, it takes a long, the gratification is not instant. So having a 6-hour view I think is good.
Yeah, but it's also separated then over the SLIs that may, like, it's more like every row that is now in this attribution thing would be a separate graph that they can watch.
So, I mean, Bob, this actually ties into that brief mention that I had earlier of the feature flags, right? So, if you can tie a feature flag to an SLI, we could give the engineering teams an out to avoid, please give us the query that you want for your logs. Please give us the query, the dashboard, the Prometheus query, and like fill in these 20 things. You can do the 20 things, or you can give us the name of the SLI. And in the first version, it's just, oh, this SLI has gone south. Okay, cancel it. But in a future world, it's like, turn off that feature flag straight away, like no human involvement. Obviously raise an alarm and everything else, but just toggle it off. And you can actually start doing stuff like, there might be multiple feature flags on at the same time, and you can kind of statistically look at which one is contributing the most.
Actually, that could be like, we already have like this solid definition of feature flags inside the code base, and it's in a YAML file. So we could add an SLI there, like an SLI name there, and then magic.
That's it. And sort of the response that I got from Christopher was like, well, do you expect like every endpoint to have an SLI? And I said, no, I expect every feature to have an SLI. And he was like, well, that's a huge ask. And I said, well, do we want to monitor these features? Like, I think it is a big ask, and it will take time. But if we can encourage it with these feature flags,
if you're talking about a feature as a feature category, we're not that far off. Like,
features slightly smaller, but it's a good start. I mean, it's a little bit highly aggregated, but it's not a bad place to start.
No, but the thing that Jan wanted to do with the service desk stuff, that's like the first thing. That's it. Like exactly what. Yeah.
So and if we can make developers' lives easier by saying, instead of filling out this long form because it's looking like it's going to be one of those, checkbox things, you can either do that or you can go write a piece of code which will give you an SLI, which will benefit us forever, right?
Yeah, you're going to have some dashboards. You're going to have some
panels. Yeah, exactly. Bob's got some great dashboards for you. You just got to do a little bit of work here, and we get that monitoring forever.
And it's much more fun to write a little piece of code that generates something than to put a bunch of boxes in form.
Totally.
So Bob, can I ask one request regarding this epic about the defining their own SLIs? Can you please update the status block today to just say where we're at with it? Thank you.
Yeah, because there's from the calls that I've been in, there's like a huge amount of pressure. There's a lot of things behind that 525 at the moment. like another example was in the call on in the infradev call or engineering allocation call on Tuesday. Eric did a great job of saying, well, let's look at the error budgets that you published, Rachel. I don't know if you watched the recording of that call. And it was fantastic. It's like, okay, well, so we breezed over it. And then Eric said, no, let's go back. What are we doing? These teams are out. What are we doing about this? Which was amazing, which was like really kind of like the enforcement of it, which was fantastic. But anyway, one of the things that came out of that was, well, then the teams have to develop one of the things that they might have to do is develop better monitoring. And I said, like, let's not go in and have like lots of teams adding like rules and alerts to the run books. Like, that's not what we want here. Let's rather wait for Bob and for 525 to be finished, and then they can get that monitoring by adding SLIs, and that will ultimately benefit the whole product, not just GitLab.com. And also, it's not going to be like a reversion back to everyone adding like the 10 alerts for the 10 last incidents and going back to that cause-based approach, right? So the pressure there was like those teams are getting told to add alerting, and I'm saying like, let's push back and wait for five to be finished, and then they can add the alerting, but they do it in the product and they own it, rather than them coming to infrastructure and saying, hey, I need an alert for this. And
the thing is,
But
when they
if there's if there's so much focus on this, and there are so many pieces that are queuing up behind it, is there any way to make this project shippable in smaller pieces? Like, I know we've got Git and API and web as separate pieces in there.
But
like, do we
that's just the thing that we are doing it for, because the ask at first was we want to set a different duration for a request, but the way we're getting there is a way to define SLIs, and we're using that thing for the requests. But the groups could already like earlier start defining their own stuff. Like, yeah, before we've gone through all of the request endpoints and set appropriate thresholds on them. It's also, Andrew, the way I currently think this, it's not magic. Like when a new SLI, like not for requests, but something else, for example, the service desk thing would be defined, it would still need to be added to the runbook somehow. Like, this is a thing that Sidekick will emit, and yeah.
It still has to be added to the,
Like,
I mean, ultimately, we should be able to just kind of pick that, like we should be able to publish that label through the through Prometheus, and then just basically inherit that label.
It's not a single metric. Like, everything that every new SLI that's defined will have a new metric, and that should have a feature category label. But like right now, the metric is like the request count and an app-deck success count or something. I don't remember.
Why don't we have a single? Why don't we use a single metric then?
And just label them all.
Like, yeah, SLI total, SLI success. I mean, that like better name than that, but basically that.
It's not a big change to do that. Just a SLI name,
and then
whatever.
And then in the runbook side, we don't have to configure each one. We just say this is a special kind of SLI, and it's we pick up the the name. It's like we inherit the name from the label. We don't define each one separately. And then literally as it rolls out, we pick it up. We'll probably still need to pick up metadata for like dashboards and stuff.
But then it becomes difficult, because then you need to, because everything will roll up into a single thing, and we need to tie it to one of those SLO thresholds that we were just discussing, and some will have a separate one, and that's tied to the label. So we need to drag some of them out of the main ones. And then
that's a good question. Do we allow the teams to publish the SLO on their side? I think you do. That's the logical conclusion of that.
Yeah, and then that's just that should just become, yeah,
because then they have full ownership.
Like, yeah, but it does become more like Yeah, it's a good
You worried
idea.
everyone's just going to set it to 90%?
Well, no, because
So
we
this is
still need
this
to
is the
go.
point we need to kind of talk a bit about how this will actually look, like this negotiation between infra and development, because that needs to happen. Like you just said, there is a possibility someone will say, well, 10 seconds is fine because my things here are green and our infrastructure can only take 5 seconds, for example. How do we want that? How do we want that negotiation to look like?
For now,
So yeah, go ahead, Bob.
for now, there's an issue inside that epic that says we're going to set the most important ones for the endpoints that we're monitoring now, but that's again just for requests. But I haven't thought about the new SLI bit of that, and I haven't thought about SLOs on the other side. So on our side, the request duration thresholds, I like in the beginning, I would just do the thing that doesn't scale and ask us.
I'd also say in the beginning that when they are set, that someone from Scalability should be a reviewer on those requests. And when we observe them to be excessive for what the endpoint is, we have to have a conversation with them about what it should be. I think, it's just the first part.
Can I offer an alternative proposal? So I think the methodology that we use for Sidekick and for saying that things can be slow, but then, basically having trade-offs. So you can have a 95% SLO, but then, so with Sidekick, it was, you can take a minute to run a Sidekick job. I mean, you could take 10 minutes if you want, but then we're not going to treat it as urgent. You can have, maybe we can do a similar thing here. Yeah, and so we give, it's kind of like a give and take, and this is like really kind of off the bat, but I mean, maybe we could do something like where we actually start sending traffic to like different parts of the fleet, and it's like, sure, your request can take 5 seconds, but that Puma, there's going to be a lot more queuing on that, and it might take like a second for that request to be seen, in a busy time, because we're going to have different scaling characteristics. We will not guarantee that job will be seen by a Puma within 250 milliseconds or whatever. So we have this kind of tension between what we provide, and that's what we do with the Sidekick, and I think it's worked very well.
So that means that we would separate the queuing latency, aptex kind of thing, which is owned by us, and then the request.
The lever there is actually the auto scaling of the fleet, right? Because that's the thing that controls that queuing latency, the amount of time it will take for Puma to see a job. And so, we'll say, by all means, you can have 5 seconds, but we're going to route your. The problem is it's kind of difficult to route traffic according to those SLIs, right? But maybe that's something we can overcome.
And just to reiterate Rachel's question, because I don't think I understood the answer to it. Is there a way for us to make this is Rachel's question, is there a way for us to do this smaller right now with one team, even if it's super janky? Because I think one of the other items that I think is worth mentioning in this call is in that same engineering allocation call, after Eric brought us back to the error budgets topic, he said, and I quote, "Buckle up, everyone," end quote. This is going to be a rough ride, so we need to be prepared that there is going to be a bit of a back and forth until we get it right. And I think we should be using that warning right now, if possible, because it works in our advantage.
So I was actually going to say this, I think we were talking about, that thing with having the single SLI but let's start off, Bob, by defining them, the way that you said, define them in the JSON, and you're going to work with Jan to kind of define one for service desk, and we will do it the manual way first, and then at some point there'll be like 200 of these things, and it'll be unmaintainable. And I see us having, I think it would be easier if those metrics all had the same. I think that could help us in future.
but
it's
that's
not a
what we're
big
doing.
deal.
Like
Yeah,
we're doing kind of that now, no, where we end up in
yeah, yeah,
GitLab service component recordings and GitLab component feature category recordings and so on, and that's how we aggregate them up with recording rules. And yeah, that's not we won't be able to keep doing that forever if so suddenly
yeah.
everybody adds 200 SLIs, but let's have them add
Yeah.
one and see where we go from there.
We'll buckle up and see how far we can get. But I do think that using consistent metric names might make it easier in
Like
future.
right
I
now,
don't. Yeah.
I'm the what I did there is no, what I plan to do is enforcing a feature category label on an SLI. That's well enforcing um, if we review that, that's what I'm going to mention. But the feature category label, for example, for requests is going to be different all the time, and the naming is also prefixed. Like the names are also all going to be the same. It's like prefix with GitLab SLI, SLI name, and then it has a total and a success count. So two
Okay.
counters with that name.
Can we, I don't have this fully formed in my head, so this may not come out straight, but can we get it to the point where we can tell the stage groups what we want them to do while we actually build it to work in the background? So if we
Yes.
know that this is the structure
Yeah.
that we want it to have, it needs to look like this in the files, can we write the documentation for them, give them the instruction to get on with it and do it? And then at the same time, we're
Yeah.
doing all the work,
Absolutely.
because then they've
Yes,
got something
that's-
concrete to do.
This is the merge request that I already have open, and the merge request that Kwang Min already has open is the start for that. So then they can start defining SLIs and adjusting thresholds theoretically.
Yeah. But they just
But they
don't
will
have
not
any
be.
impact. Yeah.
They will not be
Yeah.
rooted to anything. They will not be tied to alerts and not be tied to services.
Yeah. And out of interest, is that an API that you've defined?
I am defining.
Yeah. But yeah, because you can have an API and get everyone to implement the API, and then what you do on the back end of that is kind of you can parallelize those things.
Okay, so Bob, as part of updating that epic today, can you please, perhaps actually you and I need to have a separate conversation after this so that we can figure out from that epic which pieces get pulled, because I want to be able to communicate to people, we're doing this part of it at this line, we need you to start defining SLIs while we do these other things. I just want to be able to have the communication that we can send out to people. So perhaps you and I can chat after.
It would be very nice, like even before we start doing stuff with the SLRs, that they define in the Rails code base, that metrics are there when we start doing stuff with them for alerting and monitoring. Like, because otherwise we have nothing to work with. Like if we have 7 days worth of data, that's handy.
That sounds excellent. That sounds like an excellent step.
Or is there anything else that anyone would like to chat about? Or feel free to stay on the call to talk about taking the epic to pieces. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording then.